Welcome to the IQ webinar on current practices for QSP model assessment. My name is Jason Chan, and I am honored to have the privilege to present a summary of the work and discussions amongst members of the Quantitative Systems Pharmacology Working Group, which is co-sponsored by both the Clinical Pharmacology and Translational ADME leadership groups at IQ. After this relatively short presentation, Britton Boris and Frank Gibbons will dive deeper into a couple of interesting topics, which we hope you'll find informative, leading into a roundtable discussion, which will be chaired by Valerie Damian. For some brief history, the original QSP working group had a mission to provide insight into the goals and challenges of QSP modeling for drug development. This was accomplished via an industry survey focused on preclinical use of QSP, a webinar illustrating case studies, and a perspectives manuscript that highlighted opportunities for engagement with regulators. The sum of this work made clear that given the purposeful complexity of QSP models and their myriad of use cases, it is not clear how they can be evaluated. This gave rise to the second working group on QSP, which had the mandate of understanding current practices and the impact of context for model assessment. To orient everyone, it's useful to go back to the seminal 2011 NIH white paper that provided an initial definition for QSP. It was described as an emerging discipline focused on identifying and validating drug targets, understanding existing therapeutics, and discovering new ones. The goal, encapsulated in the models, is to understand in a predictive manner how drugs modulate cellular networks in space and time to impact human pathophysiology. It was acknowledged then that it is a multidisciplinary endeavor, which brings challenges for training modelers and was a topic of discussion for our working group that we will touch on today. For the purposes of today's webinar, it is useful to understand that there is a continuum of modeling approaches that can be roughly categorized based on statistical and structural considerations. QSP models tend to have greater structural complexity and are primarily knowledge-driven. By contrast, empirical models exist at the other end of the spectrum, have more statistical rigor, and are entirely data-driven. What type of model to use is typically dictated by the research question and availability of data, with empirical models particularly relevant for interpolation and mechanistic models useful for extrapolation and hypothesis generation. The previous IQ survey identified many different applications for QSP models, including assessing the impact of competing hypotheses, predicting clinical efficacy, and compound selection, as they can be used to optimize and prioritize candidates. These models have been applied across many therapeutic areas. As such, one may already anticipate that a single approach to assess QSP models may not be practical in all circumstances. The notion of a flexible approach to QSP model assessment was described by Saroja Ramanujan and her co-authors, as indicated in the figure on the left. The key consideration is that context should dictate how much rigor or flexibility is required. Each number in the figure corresponds to a specific study. For example, a QSP model with implications for clinical trial design and pipeline decisions, as indicated by case study number 1, may require more stringent criteria for model qualification than a QSP application focused on understanding how one mechanism of action may differ from another in a disease state, as indicated by case study 3. This perspective article identified 4 areas of assessment that align with the workflow for developing QSP models, as indicated in the figure on the right. These areas consider aspects of biology, implementation, simulation, and robustness. The importance of context was explored in an exchange with the FDA at the end of 2021. The goal of this exchange was to understand whether a credibility framework, as illustrated here, is applicable across different modeling approaches, and to understand if the modeling community knew that it is a requirement from the FDA for the model-informed drug development pilot program. This framework, which was put forth by the FDA, is similar to other frameworks as it starts first by identifying the question of interest, understanding the context in which the model is being used, establishing risk-informed credibility criteria, and then execution and documentation of the credibility assessment. Each of the steps are tailorable depending on context and encapsulates input from a team of experts. Reporting is facilitated by a matrix with model influence and decision consequence characterized to assess model risk. This framework allows for flexibility and gives modelers a standard way of communicating with regulators. The outcome of this exchange for QSP was that it revealed that relatively few QSP modelers were aware of the FDA requirement for a verification and validation framework to accompany submissions to the MIDD pilot program. Having said that, the good news was that QSP modelers, by and large, already use a framework or something similar as part of their standard workflows. Given the importance of context for understanding verification and validation of QSP models, our working group conducted another survey to understand current practices with the aim of identifying how context may impact model assessment. The intent of the survey was to provide a foundation from which standards and best practices may be proposed and to identify opportunities to further the adoption of QSP in industry. The audience for this survey was individuals who identified themselves as QSP modelers rather than company-level responses. In the next few slides, I'd like to touch on some highlights. With respect to application, the survey found that QSP is used more regularly earlier in development, particularly to facilitate internal decision-making. QSP modeling appears to infrequently support regulatory interactions, as suggested by this figure. This warrants further investigation, as a recent FDA report suggests that the appearance of QSP in regulatory documents is on the rise. With respect to assessment, the survey results suggest that while it is routinely performed, the methods used can be quite variable, regardless of whether the application has a clinical or preclinical focus, as indicated on the figure in the left. With respect to publication, it does appear that preclinical modelers are more likely to include all the data compared to clinical modelers. Reasons are unclear, but could be related to the proprietary nature of individual patient data. Regarding documentation, the survey found that this is a surprisingly simplistic and informal process, with slide presentations and Excel spreadsheets being amongst the most common methods. This suggests some opportunities for implementing version control systems and parameter databases, which could facilitate model reuse and training of new modelers. With respect to robustness, the survey revealed that modelers typically focused on central tendency or mean behavior early in development, with increasing incorporation of variability as candidates move through late phase. This likely reflects data availability, where early on there can be insufficient data to account for variability. Alternatively, it could suggest that early in development, stakeholders accept that there's a lot of variability and are only focused on central tendencies for decision making. This survey was published last year in the Journal of Pharmacokinetics and Pharmacodynamics. The main themes and opportunities identified are summarized here. There is good traction for QSP in translational and early phase development, with relatively fewer applications of QSP in late phase. This could, in part, be due to uncertainty around how to assess QSP models for these higher stake decisions. The IQ-FDA exchange hopefully provides some initial guidance to QSP modelers on how to engage with the FDA when using QSP. It is clear from our interactions that the FDA would like QSP modelers to use the framework to communicate model assessment with the agency. What to include in associated success criteria is left to the discretion of the modeler. At this point, we would like to take a closer look at two topics that arose during the survey and during discussions with working group members. Britton Boris will introduce the merits of engaging statistics more broadly in QSP, while Frank Gibbons will discuss education and training as new modelers enter the field. This will be followed by a roundtable discussion moderated by Valerie Damian. We encourage the audience to enter questions via the chat mechanism, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. I will now turn over the presentation to Britton.
Thank you, Jason. As Jason mentioned, one interesting finding from our survey was the relationship between QSP modeling and statistics. Respondents, who you will recall are self-identified QSP modelers, had strong overlap with PBPK, PKPD, and to some extent pharmacometric modeling, as you can see by the populations of the Venn diagram on the right. However, if you look at the statistical bubble in light green, very few respondents worked on both QSP models and on statistical models. Furthermore, when we asked about who are the key stakeholders in their QSP modeling efforts, respondents said that statisticians were key stakeholders less than 20% of the time. Project leaders, therapeutic area experts, and pharmacometricians were all more often stakeholders than statisticians. Only life cycle management and business and commercial interests were less common. Finally, when respondents ranked what skills are most important to success as a QSP modeler, communication, biological knowledge, mathematical knowledge, and clinical knowledge were all ranked as more important than statistical knowledge. Combining these responses highlighted a potential gap between statistics and QSP modeling, both in terms of experience in the QSP modeling community and in terms of statisticians at the table when QSP modeling decisions are being made and QSP models are being developed. I can say from my experience in industry, these responses are consistent with how stats and QSP has been aligned, or not, across this discipline. This sparked a lot of discussion among members of the working group, and with some differing opinions that we may be able to get into when we get into the roundtable.
Out of these discussions with the team, we wanted to see if the survey could help us understand why this gap between statistics and QSP modeling may exist. One possible explanation is that most QSP models are being developed and utilized in either the preclinical or the early clinical space. You can see on the bar graph on the top right that early discovery and preclinical accounts for just under 50%. And if you add in phase 1-2 of the clinical space, then that jumps to over 70% of the models being developed in the QSP area. As Jason mentioned, modelers in the preclinical space tend to focus on central tendencies and even qualitative insights from models to help their teams develop new treatments. In these areas, speed and hypothesis generation may be more essential than statistical rigor. Interestingly, we also found that while technical validation, both statistical and otherwise, was important, it was less convincing to project teams that we are trying to influence than being able to be predictive of experimental outcomes or being integrated with the project team and providing parallel lines of evidence to what the team is already generating. When working on a team with these diverse areas of expertise, it really highlights how communication and integration tend to play such a strong role, and in many cases more than technical validation.
Given the top-down nature of statistics, with the bottom-up nature of QSP modeling, it may be understandable why this apparent gap exists. However, as QSP modeling evolves, it may be helpful to try to narrow this gap. There are several areas that currently rely heavily on statistics where bringing these two disciplines closer together could provide a benefit. For example, data mining literature for model parameters is a ripe area where statistical insights could be quite useful. When we interpret these parameters where the values may be different from study to study, doing a statistical analysis of the potential differences would give insights that could be built into these QSP models. Also, one of the key questions that is being explored right now is what is the best way to incorporate omics data into QSP models? Proteomics, genomics, both rely heavily on statistical insights from large data sets during interpretation. It may be a strong area for statistical and QSP collaboration to determine how best to integrate these fields to provide our teams with quality insights. Finally, and of course, the regulatory agencies like the FDA currently lean heavily on statistics. As Jason mentioned, QSP modeling and regulatory filings are on the rise, as are the methodologies around them, including the credibility framework he mentioned earlier. Using QSP models to help inform things like Bayesian priors for trial design could be very beneficial to patients, but would require strong partnership between the QSP and statistical communities. As the decisions informed by QSP models become more impactful, the rigor around the credibility framework will and should increase proportionally. Bringing these tools together will allow each to complement each other and lead to stronger confidence in the outcome. So how do we get there? Some of it is recognizing and starting the dialogue to bring people of different disciplines together. Giving people a framework to meet with common grounds will also be helpful to facilitate communication. And some of it is making sure we have the training and education to tackle the next generation of problems we face. Which leads us to our final piece before the roundtable discussion, given by Frank Gibbons. Frank?
Thanks, Bretton. Quantitative systems pharmacology is a diverse discipline. Although there are many academic labs that are deeply engaged in developing the field of QSP, to our knowledge, there's not a single academic program in QSP. Many, if not most of the authors of our paper found that we fell into QSP rather by accident, and we feel a duty to share our perspective with others to better prepare them for what may lie ahead. Successful QSP modeling requires a range of skills. Some are the familiar disciplines, such as statistics, mathematics, and biology. Others, such as communication, can be overlooked. The bar graph on the right shows the disciplinary origin of our respondents. Starting with the largest group, we have 18 members who identified primarily as engineers, with 6 mathematicians and 5 each who identified as primarily biologists or computational biologists. But after that, the remaining respondents showed affiliation to 2, 3, or even 4 disciplines. This isn't surprising. Successful QSP modelers need to be expert in 1 or 2 disciplines, but need an appreciation for and even basic skills in many others. One of the findings of our survey was that most QSP modeler years have been spent in pharmaceutical companies, large and small, as well as contract research organizations, or CROs. This can be seen in the circular graph on the right-hand side, in which pharma is shown in blue, CROs are orange, with smaller slices for academia and regulatory authorities. This might seem surprising because all of us received extensive academic training, and most of us fell into the field of QSP as we searched for interesting ways to apply those academic skills. These different kinds of organizations have different purposes, and as a group, we felt it might be instructive to highlight the differences as a way to understand how the relative importance of certain skills can shift based on the environment in which they're deployed. There may be differences at multiple levels but the table shows a few of those in which we found the differences to be most salient, at least in the US. Academic organizations tend to focus on the individual, with labs being run by independent professors who obtain their own grant-based funding. Junior scientists are often expected to move around from one lab to another in order to build up their individual resume as a researcher with a unique skill set. In the CRO or pharma setting, however, the focus is more on teams. The nature of the work is often interdisciplinary and time-bound. There are services to be rendered by the CRO and projects to move forward at the pharma company. In academia, your colleagues tend to be very familiar with your particular skill set. That's why you're there, to learn the intricacies of a particular skill or body of knowledge from those who know it best. This may also be true in CROs, which tend to focus on delivering a particular type of service. But the complexity of pharma projects generally requires membership with a wide range of backgrounds, and duplication of expertise is rare. Your colleagues will appreciate what you do, but they may not be terribly familiar with how you do it. In terms of focus on exploration and novelty, that of course is the primary aim of the research lab. However, in the CRO and pharma setting, while high performance is always expected, it is in service to other goals, such as identifying and treating unmet medical needs. And this finally brings us to the question of influence. In broad terms, we may say that in academic circles, influence is carried through technical prowess, for example, by development of novel methods to solve previously intractable theoretical problems. However, in pharma, because of the lack of familiarity with our skill set, the way to influence is through communication as it relates to team decision-making. Without good communication skills, even the best QSP modeling can't be influential.
Hello, everyone. We are moving now into the roundtable discussion part of our webinar. And I wanted to start by acknowledging the panelists here. You've heard already from Brighton, Associate Research Fellow at Pfizer, from Jason, Senior Director at Lilly. And also we have Frank Gibbons, Scientific Director at Takeda, Jeff Kearns, Director at Novartis, and Guanyu Wang, Principal Research Scientist at Vertex. Just a few, myself, I'm Valerio Damian. I am Senior Director in GSK, and I'm moderating this session. So if you don't mind moving to the next slide, I would appreciate, first of all, for everyone in the audience to use the chat to either post your question, or perhaps we have a few questions here to get us started. If there is any particular one that you would like to hear panelists' views, please indicate it. Otherwise, we'll sort of go in order through these questions and intersperse them with questions from the audience. So let me start by asking the first questions there to every one of the panelists. What would you do differently in your role after seeing the results of the survey? And I appreciate sort of relatively quick answers so we can go to address more questions in this roundtable. So Frank, maybe you want to get started?
Sure, happy to, Damien. Can I just check that you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, pardon me. I think the main thing I would do and continue to strive to do really is communication. I think outreach to other people in other departments, other team members is critical to success in the pharma environment.
Thank you. Guanyu?
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think like one thing I learned from this survey was that, my primary, my original thinking of how QSP can be used was, when we get, plenty of clinical data so that, the model can be verified and validated. But I think based on the survey results, I think I learned that actually lots of companies are actually starting to use QSP model at a very early stage to help the program progress and understanding some biological questions. So that's like one thing that I learned that many companies are currently doing. So I think that's one thing that I could, do differently at my work, to start thinking about how to implement QSP modeling, at an early stage of a project.
Thank you, Guan Yu. Jason? I mean, by the way, I was just going in the order in which your pictures appear on the screen.
No worries, Valerie. So I guess I was somewhat surprised to see that gene expression and omics data are kind of rarely or not often used in QSP. I think there's an opportunity to get more involved with the bioinformatics folks who are doing these analyses. I think there's a lot of information that's embedded in these large-scale data sets, and any learnings from them should be incorporated into our models where possible.
Bryden?
I think that the two things that I would do differently after seeing the results of these surveys is one, the statistics that we talked about. I mean, reaching out to the statisticians and making more of a conscious effort to bring them into the conversations earlier, to try and sort of make sure that when we're designing the model, we can design it in such a way that when we get to the point where statistics can be helpful to us, that we are in a place and a shape where we can make that collaboration happen. The other thing that really the survey reminded me of was how we bring on colleagues that are new into pharma, and particularly understanding that they come from such diverse backgrounds. We really have to remember that there's going to be a decent amount of training period to bring them up to where we want them to be for QSP modeling.
Thank you. Jeff, are you online? I've seen you in and out. I don't know whether you have some technical difficulties. Can you hear us? All right. In that case, I'll circle back with a question for Jeff. So, and again, I'll encourage everyone in the audience to try to post questions in chat.
Jeff is back on now.
Oh, hi, Jeff. So you are on mute, by the way.
How about now? Does that
sounds
work?
good.
All right. Yeah. So on the first of the questions here. So I mean, so the group actually started with the topic of the model rigor and the best practices, and so I will address the question from the perspective there. I think that we actually learned that the field is actually aware of what we have to do. Most of those lessons came from the fields of the PBPK and the pharmacometrics, and so we actually know about how to train, model validation, model assessment. We actually know about how to do the model capture, retention, and the documentation. Where I think that the gap was in the flexibility often seen in the QSP field, which I think some of the others here have actually pointed out that we are in the discovery field, we're in early clinical, we're less in late clinical, and so we've got more of the flexibility there, and that is at odds with the model rigor that is oftentimes used in the empirical models in the clinical space. So what I would do as a leader now is I actually see it as a focus area for any serious translational QSP group, where we actually have to set the expectations. We have to build the SOPs that are flexible to the context of, is this a project in the discovery phase? Is it going to a health authority? And most importantly, and this is the last part, we have to resource these, and so it is an extra time, right? It might be one or more folks who are working for a week or more as you're closing the workout, and we need to build that time.
Thank you, Jeff, and thanks everyone for this first answering this first question. We have a couple of questions coming in from the audience. So the first one was, what are the different recommending training opportunities that are available to systems modelers? Anyone would want to venture an answer?
Yeah, I mean, so I could actually take like the first part there. So in our group at Vardis, we have actually hired in the last 3 or 4 years. We have actually hired about I think we're up to about maybe 20, mostly out of academia. And what we've actually found is that the training is often best done on the job, and so we will hire right out of academia, where you might not have worked in a company before. You actually might not even know what a PKPD is, and I think most of the companies are now pretty well equipped for the training. There are the student internships. Those are oftentimes harder to find, less available. There's probably more students who are applying than we actually have the positions for. And lastly, for a lot of the commercial software, there are increasingly good online learnings on their YouTube channels or in example code, and there's a lot of asynchronous learning that's available now.
Thanks, Jeff. So I wanted to go with the second question there on the on the slide, and it's something that we've been thinking. One of the results of the survey is that they would not use a QSP model developed by someone else or published by a different organization without significant verification and sometimes even re-implementation of the model. And I wanted to flip this question around. How do you envision, what do you think the hurdles are going to be from a regulatory agencies to actually trust the models that are submitted by pharma companies to their review? Any one of the panelists wanted to take a first Guan Yu, I see you.
Yeah. I can probably talk about this. I think that's a very good question. I think for large models, we always have troubles on documentation, like how to document each version of the model properly and timely. So I think that's something that we need to think about. I think currently there's like based on the survey result, there is no uniform way of documenting model changes. Some people prefer to use Excel sheets where they have different versions and they include different like parameters they changed. But then like some people just documenting models in slides. I think these make the submission of models very challenging. That you need to, I think like that's like something probably a field that that people can work on to find what is like a regulatory accepted way of documenting versions of QSP models.
Thank you. So I'm going to try to move to one of the questions from the audience, and Frank, maybe you can comment on this. So the question is about how new modelers can engage in learning QSP models. I thought this is kind of relating to the slides that you were presenting, that section. So perhaps you can try to address that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Valerio. I guess to start, I would echo Jeff's comments earlier that in terms of engaging in learning QSP modeling, formal training can take you so far, but I think there's no substitute for hands-on learning in this situation. I think that's maybe a little difficult to take on board for many of us who spent, and I assume many in the audience have spent a large portion of their lives in the academic setting getting formal training. I think learning QSP modeling is really about rolling up your sleeves and kind of figuring out what kind of practical problems become evident when you try to do it, and what kind of pragmatic solutions people come up with to get around those problems. I feel like, without wanting to get into kind of discussions about drawing a bright line between, say, QSP and PK/PD, people do try to do that. I've heard people refer to the number of equations as being the dividing line. If it's above a certain threshold, then it goes from PK/PD to QSP. I'm not sure that's a terribly useful way to think about it, but there may be some element of truth there that QSP models, by definition, as Jason pointed out earlier in his presentation, they do contain higher levels of complexity, and that requires learning certain techniques to deal with that. So I guess in a nutshell, I would say the way to engage in it is simply to start expanding the scope of whatever work you're doing. So if you're somebody who's already doing some PK/PD modeling, maybe you look for ways to expand the scope. I don't think there's a threshold where you automatically transition from PK/PD to QSP. But I think it's more maybe more a state of mind.
Thank you.
Valerie, can I just sort of add on to that a little bit? Just in the sense of, I think both of the questions from the audience are highlighting a gap that exists, is that there isn't this sort of, and it does tend to be on the job training, and I would obviously encourage people to apply for jobs and be upfront about, hey, I have these skill sets, but I don't have this, but you can learn on the job. But I think that this does highlight a gap that potentially we need to, as a QSP group, fill, of sort of giving more time to academics, going back into the academic setting and sort of teaching more about what QSP and what it's like to do QSP modeling, so that people feel more comfortable coming out. And so I just want to highlight that, is that I think that this is a very important gap that we do need to work on as a community.
Thanks, Bryden. I wanted to follow up with another question from the audience, and this is about what do you think about the potential of using artificial intelligence products? BioBird was given as an example there to help develop QSP model. And before I'll turn it on to Jason, I wanted to sort of highlight a, I would say, funny experience that I had. I was trying to use ChatGPT in a similar setting to basically ask, do you have any reference for QSP model in a particular indication? And the answer came very nicely and quick to say, well, there are several QSP models in that particular indication, and here's some references. And I was like, this is unbelievable. And then I clicked on the link on the first one, And what turned out to be was it was a link to a different paper. And the title and the authors, basically, they don't constitute a reference. They were plausible authors, and there was a plausible title, but it wasn't a real title. So what I'm saying with this is and I hope I'm not biasing too much the answer from the panelists, but I think that the AI tools will eventually get there, but they're not there today. So Jason, I'm going to hear your views as well.
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. So, I think I share a similar view, right? I think tools like this will be very useful to kind of speed things up, but at the end of the day, you're going to need to have that domain area expertise to be able to verify that what these tools have put together are actually, usable and correct. And I guess an analogy would be, I think, in the software side of things, my understanding is a lot of engineers now are using, tools like ChatGPT to write code, and it's extremely fast and it gets you a really good starting place, but you still have to spend time to go through and make sure everything's okay. And oftentimes it's not usable until you do that. So I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on, and something that hopefully will speed up this sort of work.
So if I may paraphrase a little bit the question, and moving from artificial intelligence and replacing that with machine learning, if we're talking about in what ways machine learning can actually help in our model, what's your opinion of that?
So I guess for machine learning, it depends on what your objectives are. But I think one of the things, so I haven't had too much experience in that area yet, but one of the things from my understanding is that sometimes you don't understand the reasons for why you see a result. And I think that's really a key gap, because the premise of QSP is it's a mechanistic model, and you should be able to understand, what you're seeing as a simulation result. So that's the only comment I would have.
Thank you.
If I could build on.
Go ahead.
Great. To Jason's point, it's long been a criticism of machine learning models that they're black boxes, and the performance might be great, but you don't really learn anything. And one exciting development that I saw several presentations on last year at ACOP was the idea of explainable machine learning models, which I think was a pretty exciting development. So, techniques have recently become available that allow the models to essentially explain what factors are driving certain decisions, certain key features of a model. And just spitballing here, I'm imagining what the potential might be to hook up explainable ML with something like ChatGPT, in terms of kind of pulling out the technical details and perhaps explaining it in less technical language. I think there might be quite a bit of potential there.
Yeah, as a as a third answer here, right? So as the survey showed, there is a lot of focus in the QSP field is actually in the preclinical stage, and that includes also use of the QSP models early in the lead optimization phase. And that's actually been presenting a cool opportunity for us working with the data scientists who have the MML models. When you were going through a compound screen and you might have some early PK ADME data, it might be coming from biochemical assays where they are predicting what are what is the binding, what is the potential bioavailability, the cell uptake, the PK parameters, and we oftentimes actually start with those in our QSP models of what is the potential parameter space for a drug against this particular target. And we can actually apply our QSP models working with our data science teams, asking if we have a compound screen, if we were to actually make all of these compounds, run them in vivo studies, which of these would actually work? And so there's a lot of practical opportunities right now. This isn't a future case. We are doing this right now, where we are taking advantage of these ML models.
So thanks, Jeff. And I think that I was going to comment about this as well. It's not a question about, you're using either QSP or machine learning. I think the question there is about, best ways moving forward to link the two and get them to work harmoniously and leverage their benefits. And with that, I wanted to move to the third question that we have here. And hopefully I'll get to hear from a few of the panelists about what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the QSP community, and also what are the biggest opportunities for the community. So Brighton, perhaps you may want to get us started on that. And
Sure. Biggest challenge facing the community, I still think is in the regulatory agency, and it's also the biggest opportunity, is we need to be able to use our models to impact the regulatory documentation and clinical studies and things like that. And we need to be able, and it is a challenge to create the models in such a way that they have the validity that we can make these decisions and allow the regulatory agencies to have confidence in the decisions we make, while at the same time allowing us to still be mobile enough to create these models in a way quickly so that we can inform preclinical as well. So I think it's this give and take between enough rigidity for regulatory agencies and enough fluidity for preclinical that I see as both the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity.
Guan Yu, perhaps you can provide your views as well.
Yeah, I think probably this is also related to Jeff's comment on the previous question. I think like one of the biggest challenge for the QSP community, I would think is the data. The QSP models are usually large models where there are multiple parts and many parameters that we need to understand and verify, validate. So no matter what kind of data they're using, either literature data, public data, or like some internal data, I think generating the right data for understanding the right part of model and the right parameter, I think this will be a big challenge, even for like PK/PD modeling. Like based on my experience, I think getting the data that needed for implementing model is very important. So I think that's also going to be a big challenge for for the QSP models.
Jason, do you want to comment perhaps around opportunities that you're seeing from your standpoint?
Yeah, I can comment. So, probably a lot of it relates to the themes that we've talked about today, right? So I think one of the biggest challenges is sort of, I would call kind of like scaling, right? So you've heard that there are no clear programs in academia focused on QSP. I think this makes it challenging to hire and to scale efforts within companies. So kudos to Jeff, who's growing a large team. And I think this is especially a problem because the learning curve tends to be steep when you have these complex models. So I think that's one challenge. And then for an opportunity, I think there is really, at least from my perspective, an opportunity to further engage folks with statistics backgrounds, right? So both stats and QSP provide analysis that's used for decision making, but both communities don't necessarily understand each other. And so I guess that relates again to some of the stuff around communication. But I think, things like using QSP output as parts for Bayesian analyses is a nice way to kind of get folks involved and engaged in these two disciplines.
So can I move to the fourth question there on the slide, and this is asking the panelists to dream a little bit, and if you can standardize to one aspect of QSP model development, what would that be? The idea behind this is that the model development is fairly complex, takes time, takes effort, and trying to leverage what exists in the public domain would help a lot. Would help with the question number 2 that we had there around models submitted for the review, if there was a standard in which things are being communicated. So with that, what do you think we should standardize?
Yeah. So of the 5 here, I think that what the survey showed is that we actually know how to do 4 out of the 5, right? So we actually know how to build. We know how to build models. We know how to implement them. We know how to validate them, and to also document. There are rough edges, so I think the flexibility in our field means that we need multiple software stacks, that we can't all use the same software, but we actually know, at least in theory, how to do all of those 4. It's really the 5th one. It's the model. It's the assessment, where I think there's actually still the debate within the field. As we have met with the FDA, and there was the one day event back in July 2021 on the topic of how do we assess models. I think that right now is the existential crisis in the QSP field of how do we convey trust? How do we convey what the purpose is that we have made this model for? What can be interpolated from our model? What can be extrapolated? All of that falls in the model assessment realm, and that's where I think the biggest gap is, and the biggest opportunity.
Can I sort of focus on the aspect of standardization? So just if you want, either pick one of those, or just a very brief justification. I wanted to hear from some of the other panelists as well. So Frank, what do you think? You have a magic wand. Where do you put it?
Well, it's very interesting that Jeff used the word trust, because I think that's, for me, that's the thread that runs through almost all of these questions. I think it's one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest opportunities, and for me, it comes down to documentation out of the 5 that you put in question 4, because I think that's how you convey trust. Modelers don't want to use somebody else's model because they don't trust it. And why don't they trust it? Well, even if they trust the implementation, they still need to see the validation and assessment. And documentation is a really, really hard thing to do. It's, is it about simply providing tables of species and parameters? Is it about talking how the model was validated? Is it about talking about why it was implemented in a particular way? Is it about talking about its domain of validity? To me, it's something that is it's a huge challenge, right? These models are designed to be large in scope and complex in their implementation, and sometimes it can take longer to understand the documentation than it can to build it yourself. And I think that's something that we all wrestle with, right? And I'm not really sure what the answer is, although I think there are some interesting paths that could be explored, things like notebook environments, which are available in many different environments. So whether it's R Markdown or MATLAB notebooks, Mathematica notebooks, whatever it is, that kind of environment that keeps the implementation, the data, and the validation and documentation together in a single unit, I think can be quite helpful and can build trust, right? If you can see the model executing in front of you, you can see how it performs relative to the data, you can maybe add to it to convince yourself that it's validated to your liking. I think that can really go a long way. So for me, it would be documentation in the broader sense of the term.
in just 30 seconds or less, because we have just 2 minutes before the end of the webinar. Jason, any again, you've been given the magic wand. Where would you put it?
So, I think this is a difficult answer. Difficult question to answer since context is really important. I think, QSP applications are broad ranging and have different levels of data in terms of quality and quantity that are used both for, model building and qualification. So I'd probably say model validation, maybe coming up with some guidelines for what qualifies as good model validation under certain contexts would benefit the community and help with stakeholder discussions, I think.
Thank you. Bryden?
Same thing as a lot of the others have talked about. The one thing I would say is maybe specifically talking about what's published. If there was a way to standardize what we accept as is necessary for a publication, so that when we get these models, we know what sort of went into producing them.
Thank you. Wanyu, your views here?
I think I agree with what everyone said. I will probably say validation. I don't have a regulatory experience on, as how they accept QSP models or refuse QSP models, but I think it would be great to have some guidance on, how would they view QSP model as, as a good model? Like what kind of, parameters validation they need to see, what kind of data they need to see, or do they need to see the model works on multiple compounds, or like just one is enough? For PKPD model, you usually cannot say this is a good model, until you test it on multiple compounds. So I think that's like one thing I would like to see.
So we are at time. I just wanted to thank all the panelists for their opinion on this, and as you can probably see from both the results of the survey, the presentations today, it's quite important to understand where the QSP community is going. I think that we kind of all agreed that there is quite an important aspect of QSP development in the future, focusing on the model assessment and model validation. And I like the word that Frank was using, building trust in the QSP model. If of interest, we can try to address some of the other questions that we haven't gotten to through in the chat, because I was quite interesting to see some of the answers, particularly to question 6. There is my experience that when your model aligns with what the project team thinks, the validation is still needed, but it's less critical. Whereas when you are telling the project teams that, well, the QSP model is predicting something different, usually the validation requirement, the probing to gain the trust of the team, there is actually quite challenging. But that being said, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for participation in the webinar. As Malia was saying in the beginning, the recording would be available as well. Thank you.
Thank you all.